All right, so we should have answers by now because I got a little chit chat going on. What affects climate? Raise your hand. Help me out. Temperature. Like an individual temperature? Like today it's like 30 degrees. I like temperature comes into play.
El Nino.
El Nino? Wow, El Nino. What's El Nino? El Nino means little boy. La Nina means little girl. But what are they as far as climate goes? Kennedy? Very good. Mainly to the Pacific Ocean, and then it does in turn affect the atmosphere, because where does the atmosphere get its thermal energy from? The ocean and the continents, the ground. All right? And then it transfers the energy up to the air, the atmosphere. That's why the lower atmosphere is warm, and as you move up in the troposphere, it starts to get cooler. All right? Now, El Nino, La Nina, you should have gotten through, because it's like in the first 2 pages yesterday. And then the 3rd and 4th page, which some people were skipping, were those National Geographic pages. I think it's 76? 77, thank you. Really good picture there, all right? It shows you what happens with El Nino is where that hot water is on the surface of the ocean, and it gets blown towards the west coast of the U.S., which is why, generally, overall, it would lead to warmer temperatures globally, all right? It would help build up that average. This is also why we read that article last week. They were saying it was surprising 2014 was the hottest year on record, and it was also not tied to El Nino. Generally, the hottest years on record have been tied to also the El Nino effect. Now, conversely to El Nino, what's La Nina? If El Nino brings warm water to the surface and over to the west, what do you think La Nina does? Cold water, all right? It pushes that hot water, that warm water, over towards the west and brings up the cold water towards the east or the west coast of the U.S., all right? And therefore, then you get some chillier temperatures, all right, or lower temperatures. All right, but that's El Nino, La Nina. So that, yes, does affect climate. What else? I think on the 5th page, there's a whole list of things that you may not have gotten to. I know we were shifting things around yesterday.
Global catastrophes.
Global catastrophes, such as volcanic eruptions can absolutely cause it. One, because they release gas, noise. They release noise. They release gas. They release gas. But they also release something else.
Oh, are you asking about the volcanoes?
Still about the volcanoes, yes. What else do they release other than gases into the atmosphere? Ash, solids. That particulate gets up there. It can block out the sunlight, lower the temperature. Remember we talked about Yellowstone? If that super volcano were to explode, they said the amount of debris put into the air would lower global temperatures by 20 degrees, all right? Because it's going to block out the sun's rays, all right? What else can affect climate? Kennedy. What's that? Human activity, which, you know, I've been trying to save that one. I know we've been harping on that most of the year, but I was saving that right now. But yes, absolutely human activity. What else? So many things that can play into climate, but there's a certain list that they give here in the book that we're going over this section right now. Somebody, you can put your hand down. Too much, Kennedy. There we go, Palmer.
It says movements in space.
Movements in space. The Earth is tilted, right? Is that tilt always the same? It's about 23.5 degrees. If we wobble on our axis, if that changes, is that going to change the temperatures on our planet? Yeah, that can have long-term effects, which long-term climate. All right. What else happens over the long term that can affect climate, Palmer?
Movement of Earth's crustal plates.
Yeah, what have we been talking about before we got into the atmosphere? And that we were talking about the surface, the plates, as they move. Look, Antarctica is very frigid, cold. Has it always been that way? Oh, so everybody said no. All right, no. Because remember when you did your little Pangea slide thing? It used to be a part of Pangea, one of the supercontinents that have existed over time. All right, they shift and move. As they move, that certainly affects climate. It adjusts the oceans, the currents change, all of these things. What I want you to understand, there's so many things that affect climate. It's not just one thing. Yes, human activity is part of that, what we look at, but there's many other things that can come into play. All right. Also, one of the things that doesn't talk about in there is solar cycles. When we're going around the sun, we pick up different amounts of solar energy depending on where we're at. You know, we have that nice, people see the diagram, looks like we just go in this nice oval pattern around the sun, but actually it kind of shifts up and down a little bit, and depending on when you start to get down, the sun throws its energy out in definite certain directions. If you start to move down into the area where it's releasing more radiation, you're collecting more energy. Easy test, yes?
I think so. I think I got it all wrong.
I think I got it all wrong. It was easy. Well, as long as you got through it.
Maybe we should just go to Monsters Inc., and do stuff like that instead of, burning fossil fuel.
We should run on laughter or fear.
No laughter.
Because I didn't make you cry.
Oh my God.
Now, what I want to do is pick back up. You should be around halfway through the section, which is like page 79 or 80. What we need to be moving through is heading to page 84. Like I said, it's a long section. This is the second day of it. We're going to wrap this section up today. You should get to the 5 questions today. But look, you need to run through. Right here's where I stopped us at. What causes climatic change? All right, what affects the climate? I stopped on 78. You can read about the atmospheric solids and liquids. It has to do with volcanic eruptions. You can notice where they tend to concentrate. All right, energy from the sun on 79. And I love there's a warning, never look directly at the sun. That's bad. Sad day. 80, Earth movements, amount of solar energy, crustal plate movement. It talks a little bit more in depth about all the pieces that we've just, basically the right side of my room is covered. Climatic changes today. Notice they have a little drawing of a greenhouse. Oh, yes, what we were talking about yesterday in the bell work. That greenhouse effect, and it's also going to start to get into
Global warming.
wow, global warming. Yes, thank you. And then human activities. Now remember, this book is about 1.5 decades to 2 decades old. So once we finish this today, tomorrow and the next day, we're going to be bringing in newer information, iPads, computers, articles, and we're going to look at some new sources of information, and then we're also going to judge them. Because the issue with a lot of the things people find on the intranet now, the interwebs you look at, is that there's a lot of BS, meaning bad science out there, cherry-picked data, all right, sensationalized headlines, misinterpreted results, and that gets claimed by both sides, all right? But true scientists, if you look at data, yes, you can say you can interpret data any way you want, but when you see trends in data, it gets hard to dispute over a period of time if you're not just looking at one thing, all right? So, I want you to continue reading and get to page what? 84. And then what are you going to do when you get to page 84? Do the questions. What do you need to do first? Read it. Who has a question for me? You guys read too easy today.
We just want you to kind of leave us alone.
Yes, sir. Do what? Oh, yeah, you can have your book. I was trying to figure out whose book I stole.
Cat said page in front of transparent. And she was like, please say. And I was like, he just said he wrote on the board cat. And she's like, I love him. I sent your sister to go. I wouldn't do it. She knew who I was. She was
Oh, yeah, you already have filled out? I'll sign it first. Scott. Ladies. So many ladies. Okay, let's play for you and me. That's what I'm ready to do. Self-pay 74. You're self-pay 74. You're in the right area. Timmy's in the right area. Come on, guys. You need to read. Definitely need to read. Just because you answer the questions. Okay. So what do you do when you finish? Get something to read, get something to work on, do your math, do your language arts. I don't know. Work on something or I'll give you some extra work. Do what, honey? Green, blue, blue. Okay. You look green. You look green on my shirt then too. I gotta do what? Sure. You know what? That's fine.